Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. This is episode 192. And today, because of the debate, a bunch of students asked me who my favorite president was. And so we're going to talk about that today. Okay, so the kids who asked me were mostly city kids. In fact, nearly all of them are city kids. And so Obama was their favorite president. And they asked me if I liked Obama, since I wouldn't give them an answer in terms of who my favorite president was. And I asked them why Obama was their favorite president. And they all kind of stopped because they realized that they wanted to say, was that because he's black? Which was suddenly awkward, right? I mean, so you're only going to vote for a person because they're black. And then it came out that even though that America elected a black president, America is extremely racist. And so I walked through that, thought process with that child. And I said, hey, so America elected a black president, but twice, right? But the country is racist. And he said, yeah. And so it's that learned, socialized contradiction that he just simply repeated. Everyone else, it seemed, judging by their silence, realized how awkward that situation would be. Obviously, these guys, sixth, seventh, eighth graders, they don't really know. They don't vote. They're just simply parroting what their parents, what some of their parents anyway, might have said. I was a little surprised that, I try not to give an opportunity for the kids to, share what their families are saying. I don't want to create that kind of atmosphere. And so I made a point to say that I don't care who the president is, as long as that person leaves me alone. They kind of got a kick out of that. But then they asked me what I thought about Lincoln. And I thought, yeah, he wasn't a very good president. And obviously, there are a lot of things that you could say about this individual, but the Civil War did not actually have to be fought. That if you wanted to free the slaves, you didn't have to fight a war. The fact that he gave teeth to the Fugitive Slave Act, also, the plans for freed slaves to send them back to Africa, didn't actually endear Lincoln to these inner city kids, if you know what I'm saying. Then he asked me about Truman, Harry S. Truman. And I said, you mean the guy, the only president to have dropped nuclear weapons on civilians? So it was this kind of situation where I tried to sort of explain to them that the presidents who probably were the best were the ones that no one ever talks about, right? So Calvin Coolidge, nicknamed Silent Cal because he didn't really talk a whole lot. Well, no one really knows about him because he didn't do any grand plans. And that's what makes him a good president. And so there was a sort of shock when I said to them that if a president is promising to do a lot of things for them, you should say no, thank you, right? Especially because they're not really trying to help you. And why can't you help yourself? Why can't you empower yourself with information and make decisions for yourself? So in reality, the whole time I'm having a conversation with them, in the back of my head, I'm like, am I going to get in trouble with their parents? Right. So what is it? Back to school night is still 2 weeks out. And so I'm trying very hard not to stir up controversy. So that night I will come under direct attack by parents. Like, what are you teaching my child? Granted, it is a Christian school, but politics is politics, right? So I wanted to emphasize that what I want for them is not to try to figure out who they should support, whose side they're going to take, but rather to take their own side. that I'm teaching them to try to learn skills, evaluate information correctly, properly, in a good way, so that they can make good decisions for themselves, not for the benefit of a political party or anything like that. And so it seems that, and then so, the Trump Harris debate only came up in passing, but I just simply said I didn't listen to it, which I did not. And I got to tell you, I didn't listen to it because I knew that I would just cringe, right? And I hate cringy things. I just try to avoid cringy things. And so, what do I mean by cringy? Well, when I used to follow professional sports and I used to get really into it, and there was a team that I thought was really was in a good position to win, but then they don't show up to play, right? So they do horribly in the game. And so you see them do mistake after mistake after mistake, and you're like, what is going on? That kind of cringe. There's the feeling of powerlessness, the inability to change the outcome. You just by yelling at the TV, you can't make someone do better or worse. And so I knew that if I watched the Trump debate, that I would be full of cringe because Trump would drop the ball. In other words, I said to my wife, I bet, and I was so happy that Tulsi Gabbard was recruited to help him prep for debate. But then in my head, I was like, he's not going to meet her. If he did, it would be for 5 minutes just to say, oh, you're really awesome, right? But it wouldn't be to get advice. And that's my impression. I said that if he met Gabbard, it would probably be for 5 minutes just to say hello. And then he never made time for prepping for debate, right? And so she's like, really? My wife, she's like, really? And then I listened to Ron Paul and his take. Now they watched it, but Daniel McAdams said in passing that Trump has he has an opinion that he doesn't need to prep. And so he didn't prep at all. And it's pretty obvious, right? They said it was pretty obvious he didn't prep. And so when my wife walked in, I said, oh, it was worse than 5 minutes. He didn't prep at all. And it's just kind of unbelievable that he wouldn't prep, like prep for a hostile news anchor, prep for an over-prepared Kamala Harris, prep for lies, prep for people fact-checking him, but not Harris. All of the various hostile scenarios. Why didn't you prepare for that? And the fact that he did not is obvious to some, I guess. In other words, the format of the debate is not the same as making a speech to the choir, right? So you're preaching to the choir, right? So he's always giving speeches to his fan base. And so they'll eat up anything he says. But you can't use the same approach to people who are hostile to you. And so that seeing him fall apart that way of not being able to have comebacks or to be able to respond to the fact that he kept getting fact checked, and when Harris would say things that are proven false and not be fact checked is kind of cringe for me. So the big question is, who's going to leave me alone? Who's going to leave us alone? Who's going to pass legislation for us? A lot of politicians, what they're going to do is they're going to promise the world to their constituents. Oh, I'm going to do this for you. I'm going to do that for you. They always do that. But the legislation that they promise means less freedom for us, more control to do things in the way that whoever is appointed determines is the right way. And who's to say that after this person dies, or if this person retires, that the person who takes his place will continue the same policy? There is no guarantee. So one thing that I always try to remind all of my students is that no one voluntarily chooses poverty. Everyone tries to make the choice that works out best for them. You don't need a politician to try to tell you what that is. All you need is information. So, really, what candidates are doing is they're making speeches for very specific special interest groups, not for us, not for you and me, but unless you're part of that special interest group, uh, you are not being advocated for, right? So, candidates are making speeches so that if they get elected, the special interest group that supports that candidate is going to have a windfall. They're going to get a lot of government money. They're going to get subsidies. They're going to get contracts. All right. Uh, so it's not for our benefit, but it is for the benefit of very specific individuals in society. Now they're going to get the contracts. They're going to get the job. They're going to get the government funding, not because they're the best, not because they're the fastest, not because they're the most cost effective or the highest quality, but based on who they know. So special interest groups, they hire lobbyists to go to Washington, D.C. to make a pitch to the politicians, right? You should do this and we'll do this in return. This is how it's beneficial. But it's from the perspective, the subjectivity of a small group of people. And so, of course, they're going to pitch an idea that is, fantastic for that group, but they also say it's great for everybody, right? And so they're going to make that pitch, and that pitch is always, uh, very sweet in sound. It's going to sound very appealing, which is why so many politicians will say that's a great idea. But as we've discussed not that long ago, especially with the tariffs episode, right, this is not beneficial for the majority of the people who live in the United States. So when the auto workers want special perks for themselves, it punishes everybody else who lives in the United States because now the cars are more expensive. I did this thing when, so obviously this is racial. Special interest groups are racial groups, right? And if you recall my definition of race, that is a generalization or a categorization or a category based on a specific characteristic, identifiable characteristic. So auto workers becomes the racial marker. Okay. So not your skin color, but your job. Your job becomes your racial marker. So you're advocating for auto workers. Now, I'm pretty sure that not all auto workers and people connected to the auto industry are white, but that there are people of color, so called, So Black people, Hispanic people, Asian people, I am positive. So it is possible to be part of a special interest group and at the same time, part of an oppressed group, right? So you can be an African American auto worker, receive lots of perks by being an auto worker, but at the same time, claim hardship and oppression because of your skin color. And this is the kind of, excuse me, hypocrisy or double standard or triple standard, quadruple standard that you see popping up all over the country because of special interests. Special interest groups go to Washington, they get their special perks, and whoever then is part of their group, they receive benefit at everyone else's expense. Unions, right? Various unions across America, steel work. Are there even steel workers left in America? Sugar companies. We talked about the sugar cartel not that long ago. So you're going to see lots of special interest groups who continue to lobby for special perks, special legislation, government funding, protectionist laws and legislations, tax breaks, subsidies, all of this stuff in their favor, which is paid for by everybody else. And so it's gotten so bad that I'm pretty sure that it is nigh impossible to not be implicated in this somehow. That is, receive perks on one hand, and then be sort of burdened with a higher, tax bill on the other hand, right? Wouldn't it be better if no one received any perks and none of us would receive a higher tax bill? Wouldn't that be awesome? which takes us to the final concept of the day, which is the racialization of consumer. So I'm sure 100 or plus episodes ago, I talked about the consumer as the all-encompassing inclusive racialization. All of us are consumers. We all consume. No matter if you're an auto worker, steel worker, union member, politician, we all have to consume. And so the instead of catering to a subgroup within the United States, giving them unfair advantages over everybody else, and sometimes even against themselves, focus on the consumer, right? Any legislation that comes up, does it benefit the consumer? Is it unfair to some consumers and bestow advantages to other consumers, right? If you use that as the criteria, then you'll be able to stay away from hypocritical, unjust laws, right? So consumer is that broad racialization which does not give unfair advantage to a subgroup like a special interest group, nor does it ignore the individual. This is what's also really important. Your typical racialization, like Asian, for example, the category is broad, but it also ignores the individual, right? So, what is it? The school district of my children, they had Asian Heritage Month or whatever, and they made a report of how they celebrated Asian heritage, and I debated whether or not to say something, whether if I said something, I just would create a problem because no one would understand me because their minds are just simply not there. But I actually kind of really don't like Asian Heritage Month. I don't even know what month it is, you know. And the reason is because Asian is such a broad category. How much of Asia, whose Asia are you going to celebrate? It ignores the individuals within that Asian category. So if you say, oh, we're going to have dumplings, well, does every Asian eat dumplings? Does every Asian eat rice? Does every Asian eat noodles? No, they don't. And so by celebrating Asian Heritage Month, by having a few dishes of some people who are part of your school district is goofy. Okay. And so it ignores the individual, right? And but the racialization of consumer preserves the individual. Everyone as a consumer, they get to choose from or in a marketplace that does not show preferential treatment, protectionist treatment, right? Uh, Sort of privilege treatment, right? You get to choose from what is available. Now, in the Ron Paul episode, they joked around about how Ron Paul also never prepared for debates, and it drove his staff crazy. He's like, "Oh, I don't need to debate," and they're like, "What do you mean you don't need to debate?" And he said the reason why he doesn't have to prepare is because he always responds from the same principle, right? And if you contrast that with Trump's lack of preparation because he just likes to speak off the cuff. But the problem with that is there is no guiding principle, which is why he gets tied up, which is why if they change up the attack, come from a different, position, from a different direction, he's not ready for it, right? Like it seems like he wasn't ready for a 3-on-1 debate, which is kind of interesting. He wasn't ready for a sober Harris, a Harris who had been practiced and prepped and didn't stumble over her words, that maybe on a little bit of something, something, who knows? But amazingly, he was not prepared for that. Now, Ron Paul, he would always argue from the principle of freedom, right? Does this preserve the freedom of society? And I would always argue from the principle of the consumer, the perspective of the consumer. Is this good for everybody? If it is not good for everybody, then it is not a good idea. So open borders. Oh, okay. So it's good for the immigrants coming in, but is it good for the people here in the United States? Obviously not, right? So any policy, if you argue for and take the perspective of the consumer, you would probably have better responses. than other people who are just simply trying to learn what the right answer is for any given question. In other words, instead of appealing to voters, specific voters and specific special interest groups, and therefore eventually contradicting yourself and torpedoing your own campaign, you're going to make an appeal to justice. Most people understand justice. And so without catering to any specific special interest group, you can garner the support of uh, a vastly larger number of voters, particularly in the independent camp. Well, I'm sure there are lots of other people who have more intelligent things to say, but something to keep in mind. The broader the perspective that we use, the more inclusive the perspective that we use, the better solutions, the better responses we can come up with, even surprise questions. That's it for this episode. I'll talk to you next time.